Why don't we get started? Again, I'm Dave Vellucci, Chief Actuary of the WCRB of California. Thanks very much for joining us for this webinar on our really collaborative effort to really study Countrywide trends in very large, or we'll refer to as mega claims. This is really the first of its kind. It's a collaborative effort by the 10 rating bureaus you see listed there to provide what is almost a countrywide perspective of this issue, as well as to compare and contrast, some of the mega trends across state. Well, fortunate for you, you won't have to listen to me drone on for the full hour, but I'll be joined by 4 other actuaries who are the principal architects and authors of the work. Wow, a whole gaggle of 5 actuaries in one hour webinar. Truly your lucky day. Joining me today in the order they'll be presenting are Brett King, who's the Director of Actuarial Research at the New York Compensation Insurance Rating Bureau, Crystal Ross, the Chief Actuary at the New Jersey Bureau, Ryan Vole, Senior Actuarial Analyst at NCCI, and Laura Carstensen, VP of Actuarial Research here at the California Bureau. A couple of notes on logistics for the webinar. As lonely as we all are working at our homes and how we'd love to talk to you, we do have a great registration list, almost 500. So hearing all of you once might be a little bit chaotic, even for us 5 actuaries, who of course, always live on the edge. So you are muted, but you can type in questions on the question panel that we will try to get to at the end of the presentation. Second, a copy of the slides we're using this morning, as well as a copy of our report, which was released a couple weeks ago, is in the handout section of the webinar software. Last, within the next couple of days, we'll have a recording of this webinar posted on the websites of all your favorite bureaus, so you can go back and listen to it again, over and over and over. So let's get going to the genesis of this study, which was really the first of its kind. The process really began a couple of years ago with meetings and conversations a number of us were having with reinsurers, excess insurer writers, member insurers, other stakeholders who were really raising questions and concerns about the potential growth of these very large or mega claims in workers' compensation. By the way, for purposes of this study, by mega claims, we're referring to a claim that has total incurred losses of $3 million or more at 2018 cost levels. So among the points we heard in some of these meetings and conversations, that the reforms that have driven overall costs down in a number of states, like California, may not be having a proportionate impact on these very large mega claims. In addition, advances in medical technologies, things like robotics, and increasing costs of long-term nursing care can be driving up medical costs on these claims. With these medical advances, as well as greater use of things like air ambulances, emergency care is truly improving, and that's probably driving some very positive trends in increased mortality for seriously injured workers. Last, we hear of claims that start off at a relatively modest level, but are becoming very high cost, with failed surgeries, issues like comorbidity, and so forth. And while there are a number of studies out there, including some from organizations that you'll be hearing from today, there really hasn't been a comprehensive study looking at this issue on a countrywide basis. So given that, and that there are the issues that were been cited by stakeholders, a number of us rating bureaus began discussing collaborating on mega claims. The 10 bureaus agreed to participate, represent the vast majority of workers' compensation premium in the country. The report that was released a couple weeks ago, and as I mentioned, is in the handout material of the webinar software, is really a result of that collaboration. Based on the stakeholder feedback we got, we identified a few key research questions. First, how frequent are mega claims, and are they becoming more or less frequent given some of those issues that we discussed? What are the characteristics of those claims, and over time, are they evolving? One of the questions that came up is that we know that many insurers are using advanced analytical tools to identify and triage claims that may grow to be mega claims. Are these tools helping claims be recognized more quickly? And do those patterns of mega claim recognition vary by the type of claim? And lastly, we dug into a couple of the largest states, California and New York, to see if there are some significant differences in mega characteristics by state. So let me go out into the study itself, the data collected. The study involved collecting claim information on a uniform basis from the 10 participating rating bureaus. This is intended to be an initial phase of this type of analysis, so only claim count information was collected in claims in excess of $3, $5, and $10 million, all at 2018 cost levels, which each individual bureau estimated and then reported those claims information. We did not collect severity information, and all the information we collected compiled on a countrywide basis across all the bureaus is included in the appendix to the report. The report, again, was really focused on claim count information only. In later phases of this work, we hope to collaborate to dig deeper into issues like severities, individual claim characteristics, such as the medical spend on these large claims, and the factors that cause these large claims to either increase sharply in value or in some cases decrease in cost suddenly. That'll be in later phases. We looked separately by accident years, beginning with 2001, looked at those claims at annual intervals and produced separate summaries by claim characteristics, such as type of industry, nature of injury, part of body, and so forth. Pulled it all together into a countrywide summary, developed report, claim count to an ultimate level. What we saw that, these claims are reported and recognized later, and so it was critical to develop to an ultimate level. Looked at comparisons to total indemnity claims from the same states for the same periods, and then looked at these patterns over time and by characteristics, and looked at it by characteristics that we analyzed. So I've gone on long enough setting the stage. I'm going to turn it over to Brett King of the New York Bureau, who is going to summarize our findings on the frequency of mega claims. Brett?
All right. Thanks, Dave. Glad everyone could join us today. And I'm going to talk about the frequency of the mega claims overall. So as we looked at combining the data across all of our study years on the next slide, we see that we have multiple states and 17 years of data, and that gives us about 4,500 mega claims to study. So that's a pretty good number of claims, but you have to consider this is only a very small fraction of the claims overall. It's about 0.04% of lost time claims that actually reach this $3 million threshold, and that means it's only 1 in every 2,500 claims that will turn out to be mega claims. So as we looked at the data, we broke it up in excess of $3 million, $5 million, and $10 million levels to kind of see how the number of claims or the frequency of these claims would change at the different thresholds, because who determines the actual threshold for a mega claim? So these thresholds were kind of chosen as these large claims to which we would look at, and we see that most of the mega claims are actually between $3 and $5 million in size. And then, of course, as you go up in above those levels, there's less and less claims. And only about 10% of the mega claims, as we define them, are actually over $10 million. And so we're going to start on the next slide by looking at how these differences look by layer, depending on the definition. And we see here, looking at the claims in excess of $3 million per 100,000 indemnity claims. So this is like a share of the indemnity claims. We do see a sharp drop during the Great Recession as construction employment kind of plummeted. And then we see that it slowly began to increase after 2013, again, as the economy rebounded. And we see this cyclical pattern that is associated or related to the economy going on here a little bit. And so as we look at the newer years, 2016 and 17 were pretty good years economically. And so those years are at or near an all-time high level that matched the peak around 2003, 2004. And since claim count is, leveraged by the development, these earlier reports have some uncertainty around them, but it does look like this is kind of a peak level of mega claims that are happening just because the economy is kind of doing well during this period of time, or at least historically during the period of time that you see here. As we go forward and look at the $5 million to $10 million size range, we do see there's a little bit more stability in this graph, but it does show the same kind of general pattern of an increase and then a decrease around those recessionary years, followed by a sharper increase on this slide for the mega claims above $5 million. And later, Krista will kind of talk to some of the reasons for this. And as we look finally at the claims that are above the $10 million mark, again, we see generally a fairly stable pattern with some increase in the more recent years. But as far as the number of claims, there's just so few of them that actually reach this threshold every year. But in some ways, the line is very volatile, and you do see a lot of up and down because of that, just the rarity of these claims. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Crystal Ross, and she's going to discuss the mega claims characteristics that we saw.
Thank you, Brett. Today, I'm going to walk through the characteristics of the mega claims. We'll start with claims by industry group or sector. For the industry group, we reviewed construction, office clerical, manufacturing, stores and dealers, transportation, and everything else was lumped into all other. Here we're showing the percentage in those layers to the industry segments. And claims from the construction sector comprise more than 35% of all claims, though construction claims comprise below 20% of the overall claim volume. And nearly half of all mega claims greater than 10 million are contributed to the construction sector. Now we'll look at it by accident year, breaking the industry group down by accident year. The mega claims by industry segment have remained relatively consistent over time. Although, as Brett referenced earlier, a decrease in the construction claims led to an overall decrease in claims, it's not quite as dramatic here. However, you do see the drop in construction claims between 2008 and 2009. And then subsequent to 2013, the share of the mega claims from the construction segment has generally increased. The next characteristic we're going to look into is the part of body. We broke down the part of body into 4 groups: all other, multiple body parts, head, brain, neck, and spine. The mix of claims has a noticeable change within the layers shown here. You see that the head and brain injuries involve approximately 17% between the 3 and 5 million, increased to 27% between 5 and 10, and approximately 30% in the 10 million layer. And head and brain injuries account for less than 5% of all workers' comp claims in most states. Also, neck and spine and head and brain injuries account for over 50% of all claims greater than $5 million. The next slide, we'll look at how those claims break down by accident year. Shares of all other have grown, The latest few years, all other represent approximately 50% of the mega claims, up from about 35 to 40% in the earlier years. Examples of some body parts that make up a significant portion of the all other segment are the trunk, lower back area, the lower extremities, your lower leg and knee, and the upper extremities, your shoulders. The next characteristic we'll review is the cause of injury. Fall and slip is the leading cause of mega claims in all layers. It is also a relatively common cause for all claims, including the non-mega claims. Here, what's driving some of the increases is motor vehicle accidents. You'll see that it accounts for about 20% of all mega claims, but 30% of claims over $10 million. And motor vehicle accidents comprise less than 5% of all claims in most states, because these tend to be pretty significant in size when they do occur. And next we'll look at the cause of injury by accident year. Again, you'll see the fall and slip as the largest in all years, comprising approximately 35% of all of the mega claims. However, the shares of mega claims by cause of injury group have remained relatively consistent over time. And here, even though the motor vehicle accidents, you would have seen an increase by layer, by accident year, it has remained relatively stable. The next breakdown we're going to look into is the nature of injury. The all other category here accounts for over 50% of all mega claims. When we all gathered together approximately a year and a half ago to start reviewing what we're going to look into in this research analysis, we had identified particular categories that we felt as a group would contribute to the mega claims. And we identified concussions and contusions, fracture, crushing, and dislocation, multiple injuries for a single claim, and then lumped everything into all other. As we started breaking it down, we realized that there were a significant number of claims in the all other category, and the largest ones of those would be amputation severance, burn electrical shock, cumulative injury, strain sprain, and sprain. Additional information on the strain and sprain will be discussed a little later in the New York and California specific sections. However, the strain and sprains, just to give you a little idea, is approximately 10% of the claims between 3 and 5 million, but only 3% over 10 million. So that's also why you're seeing a decrease as the layers are going. Now, if we look into the nature of injury by accident year, the burn electrical shock mega claims, which are included in the all other category, are becoming more common. They started off at approximately 3% in the earlier periods, but almost 10% in the more recent years. This increase may be attributed to advances in medical treatment and the improved mortality patients with serious burns are seeing. So as medical treatments are evolving, the ability to take care of the burns and electrical shocks is causing longer lifespans or just more expensive technology. And these are the things that when we look into the future, we can identify and breaking that out a little bit further. The fracture, crushing, and dislocation, which is the second largest category, has remained relatively consistent over time. Last, we're going to look at how employer's liability comes into play when discussing these mega claims. As you can see here, the vast majority are workers' comp only. This should not be surprising, as most states' employer's liability is limited to levels below $3 million. The exception there is mostly in New York, where there is unlimited employer's liability. Approximately 10% of claims involve employer's liability, with very few that are employer's liability only. The majority of those that include employer's liability are attributable to New York, which will be discussed in more detail later on in this webinar. And now I'll hand this off to Ryan Volf from the NCCI, who will present the development patterns on the mega claims.
Thanks, Crystal. So to begin looking at how these mega claims are recognized, we are first going to review mega claims reported as a percentage of ultimate by threshold. We have the percentage of claims on the vertical axis and the report level on the horizontal axis, and have plotted the claims in excess of $3, $5, and $10 million. As expected, as the report level increases, more mega claims are recognized. We had a few key takeaways from this slide. First was that fewer than 50% of claims in excess of $3 million reached that threshold by first report. And by 10th report, less than 90% of claims in excess of $3 million reached that threshold. Also, interestingly, mega claims in excess of $5 million typically reach that threshold sooner than mega claims in excess of $3 or $10 million. Next, we're going to show the 5-year moving average for the first to second report development factors over time. The average development factor is on the vertical axis, and the latest year in the 5-year average is on the horizontal axis. We decided to view these as a 5-year average because these values can be pretty volatile. Generally, the first to second report development factor has decreased over time, with the 5-year period ending in 2016 having the lowest average factor. A potential reason for this decline is the greater use of analytical models. These models may help to provide an earlier identification of potentially high-cost claims, allowing them to be triaged earlier in the claims handling process. On the next slide, which is similar to the prior slide, except where last slide showed the 5-year moving average for the first to second report, here we're showing the midterm development factors, from the second to third report factor in green, all the way up to the 5th to 6th report development factor in black. A few observations were that the second to third development factor, similar to the first to second, generally decreased over time. However, on the other hand, other midterm development factors have stayed relatively consistent. And lastly, we noticed that the 5th to 6th development factors in black have historically been higher than those from 4th to 5th report in red. The next slide is showing the late term development factors. So this slide is similar to the last, except that we're showing 6th to 7th report factor in green, all the way up to 9th to 10th report development factor in black. All the late term moving averages have generally declined over time. The next few slides in this section are similar. The only difference is that they group mega claims differently. This slide shows the percentage of claims on the vertical axis and the report level on the horizontal axis, and is plotting the mega claims as a percent of ultimate by industry. We have construction in orange, office and clerical in green, and all other in red. The orange construction line is always above the other lines, meaning that the construction sector generally reaches the $3 million threshold more quickly than mega claims in the other sectors. The largest disparity was at 4th report, where 80% of mega claims have reached the $3 million threshold, but only 55% of office and clerical mega claims have reached that same threshold. This slide is similar to the last, except here we grouped the mega claims by part of body. Starting from the top, we have head and brain in black, multiple in red, neck and spine in orange, and all other in green. As you can see from the black and red lines near the top of the graph, mega claims involving injuries to the head and brain and multiple body parts reached the $3 million threshold more quickly than injuries to other parts of the body. Approximately 94% of mega claims involving injuries to the head and brain reached the $3 million threshold by a fourth report, compared with only about 43% of mega claims in the all other category. The next slide groups the mega claims by cause of injury. We have motor vehicle accident in black, struck by object in red, slip and fall in orange, and all other in green. Mega claims arising from motor vehicle accidents, slips and falls, and being struck by objects reached the $3 million threshold more quickly than mega claims from all other causes. Approximately 90% of mega claims arising from motor vehicle accidents reached the $3 million threshold by a fourth report, compared with only about 54% of mega claims in the all other category. And lastly, we grouped the mega claims by nature of injury. Here we're showing concussion and contusion in yellow, multiple in red, all other in green, and fracture, crushing, and dislocation in black. Mega claims arising from concussions and contusions and multiple injuries reached the $3 million threshold more quickly compared to mega claims arising from the all other natures of injury. Approximately 82% of mega claims arising from concussions and contusions reached the $3 million threshold by a fourth report, compared to only about 67% of mega claims in the all other category. I'll hand it off to Laura to talk about some mega claim details specifically related to California.
Thanks, Ryan. So first, I'd like to talk about how frequent mega claims are in California than in other states. And part of the reason we wanted to dive into this is that we know that California is a relatively high cost system with some relatively high severities. And so we wondered if we would also see that sort of pattern in terms of mega claims. And overall, about 19% of all indemnity claims are in Countrywide, or what we're calling Countrywide is are in California. And of claims valued between $3 million to $5 million on an accident year 2018 basis, about 21% of them are in California. Whereas for the claims valued greater than $5 million, about 22% of them are in California. So they're a bit more common in California than in the rest of the states in this study, but not significantly more common. And on the next slide, we see the differences in reporting patterns between California and all other states. Claims tend to be reported later in California, generally speaking, and there are longer reporting patterns or development patterns in terms of the costs of indemnity claims. So we asked if we saw this similar pattern in terms of mega claims, and yes, we did. At first report, for all of the states in the study, about 50% of what we think are the ultimate share of claims are reported at first report. But for California, only 32% are. And this difference is maintained throughout the entire period of the study. And even at 10th report, we think there are fewer claims, a smaller share of claims reported in California than in the other states in the study. And one of the drivers here are that in California, we do have a number of mega claims that are coded as strain and sprain claims. And these are claims that become very, very complicated over the life of the claim. But at first report, only about 5% of those that we expect to have at ultimate are reported. And so that's a big contributor to the slower pattern of reporting in California. And on the next slide, we can see how over time the initial reporting of claims has changed. And so like the slides shown earlier, this is a 5-year moving average of the development between first and second report. And it compares California to all of the other states in the study. And we see that initially and for the first several years, there was a pretty significant difference in the amount of new claims that were reported between first and second report in California compared to all of the other states. And the peak difference was in accident year the 5 years ending in accident year 2012, where the share of mega claims increased by 45% between first and second report. And in this several years following that, this reporting decreased sharply, so that in the 5-year period ending with accident year 2016, the increase was only 19%, and this was very similar to all of the other states in the study. So it seems that we're starting to see some convergence in the reporting pattern of mega claims between California and other states. On the next slide, we look at the development in what we're calling the midterm period. When Ryan showed this, he showed each of the factors, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, 4 to 5, 5 to 6 separately. What I'm showing is those on a combined basis. You could think of those being multiplied together. And so this is really the calendar year development over a 5-year period between those second to third, third to fourth, fourth to fifth, and fifth to sixth period. And what we see over time is that the emergence has certainly sped up for California mega claims. And it's still significantly higher than what we see in other states, but it's much closer than it was early in the study. And next we see what we call the late term development. So similarly, this is the combination of 6 to 7, 7 to 8, 8 to 9, and 9 to 10. And what we've seen is a very significant convergence between the early years, the difference in the early years, and in the latest period, it's the development and the emergence in California was a little bit higher, but it's not very much higher, not nearly as much as it was at the early study. And in the period ending with calendar year 2014 development, the increase for California was 39%. And in the calendar year period ending in 2017, the increase was 17%. So that was a very significant speed up in emergence. And then next, Brett will talk about how New York mega claims emerge compared to the rest of the country.
All right, thank you, Laura. Yeah, so I will start with the same kind of view that Laura started with for California and discuss the New York share overall. And we see that New York has about 11% of the overall mega claims in the study. And we know from historical perspectives that the New York market share has changed quite a bit, but it's usually around 10%. And so we have slightly more mega claims, but not an outstanding amount than our market share might have kind of otherwise implied, even though we are a higher severity state like California. One of the things, though, that we did notice is that the incident rate of claims that are greater than $10 million is actually a little bit higher than our market size would indicate. And we'll talk a little bit about that later when we talk about the employer's liability section. But I first want to talk about the reform, because that also has a pretty big impact on why some of the older years are a little different. So in New York, in 2006, there were some reforms, 2007, and there's definitely a difference in the data between the pre-2007 period and the post-2007 period. And so what we see is pre-2007 reforms, there were a larger share of the mega claims in New York, but there was also a lower share of lost time claims in New York back then. And post the reforms, the New York lost time claim count has increased, but the share of mega claims has actually decreased and is kind of more in line with our market share. And so this is a pretty major impact, and people need to be aware of the impact of those reforms on our data. So now we'll move ahead and talk about the speed at which the claims are recognized in New York compared to other states. And New York has an even slower rate of recognition for these mega claims, at least historically, when compared with other states. So it's too early to tell really how much the 2007 reforms have impacted this pattern in the long term, because those claims are kind of too immature to study that reform impact completely. But we do suspect that this pattern may continue a little further, and that's also something that one should know about. Moving on, we'll talk about why that is happening. And again, similarly to California, we noticed that the mega claims injuries in the strain and sprain category are generally reported at later report levels, and they become a sizable portion of those later identified claims as mega claims as we move through the reports. So typically, at first to third report, there's only about 4.2% of those claims that are recognized as sprain and strain during that period. But as we get into later maturity periods, that percentage increases to about 17% from fourth to sixth report, and then after seventh, it's well above 30% of the claims. And so as time goes on, more of these strain and sprain injuries become recognized as mega claims over time. Now, these mega claims are typically on the lower end of the range of mega claims. They're less likely to reach that $10 million level than they are the $3 million level. And so that's one of the important reasons that the New York, lag in recognition of some of these mega claims happens. All right, moving on to talk a little bit more about the employer's liability segment. As Crystal mentioned earlier, the employer's liability claims are quite rare. We see that overall, about 10% of claims involve employer's liability in some form. And if you look at the layers, the higher layers are more likely to involve employer's liability. For the claims excess of $3 million, it's a little bit under 10%. For the claims excess of $5 million, it's probably around 10% or a little higher. And then for the claims excess of $10 million, it's probably just a little bit north of 12% or right around there. So this is an overall view. And on the next slide, we show you the New York share of these claims. And what we see is that New York has a large share of the employer liability claims, with an increasing share of these claims as the size level of the mega claims threshold is increased. And so what we can see here, looking kind of towards the right half of these graphs, is that for the excess of $3 million level, New York has about half of those claims. Excess of $5 million, that percentage increases again until at excess of $10 million, we're up over 3/4 of those employer's liability claims. And as Crystal mentioned earlier, New York has no limit of liability for the employer's liability component, and that explains why this happens. All right, so I'm going to turn it back over to Dave for some concluding remarks.
Thanks, Brett, and Laura, and Crystal, and Ryan. Appreciate those, summaries. So just a few concluding remarks to kind of summarize the information that the team's presented. In terms of, as Brett indicated, that coming out of after plummeting during the Great Recession, the share of mega claims has really been on the upswing since 2013. We do see a little bit of a spike in 2016 and 2017, and depending on how those years counts develop, we either at an all-time high or very close to it. As Crystal discussed, there are some real differences by characteristic. Not surprised, there's more in construction than in other industries. Falls and motor vehicle accidents are more common of mega claims than they are of all claims. Lastly, Ryan talked about the recognition pattern of mega claims, and that only about a half reached that $3 million threshold by 18 months, and only 90%, even by more than 10 years from the policy inception, only about 90% of claims that ultimately will be mega claims are recognized as such. We are seeing some signs of a speed up in recognition as potentially some of the analytical tools that insurers are using to identify and triage claims that may grow to be mega claims are having an impact. Again, not surprisingly, construction claims are recognized more quickly than in other industries. Similarly, motor vehicle accidents, brain injuries tend to be recognized more quickly. Laura kind of summarized the California characteristics, a slightly higher frequency of mega claims than non-mega claims, but not dramatically different. And a recognition pattern that is somewhat slower, though. Those differences in how quickly claims are being recognized in California seem to be narrowing. Some of that difference we think is a prevalence due to the prevalence of strain and sprain claims, which often start out at modest levels and then, develop over time as, due to failed surgeries, maybe some comorbidity and so forth. And lastly, Brett talked about the impact of the reforms in mega claims, as well as the higher than typical proportion of claims involving employers' liability that reached the $3 million threshold. So that's basically a summary of what's in the report. As I mentioned, a copy of the report, which was released a couple weeks ago, is in the handout section of the webinar material. And we do want to, we have a few minutes to address some of the questions we've been getting. So Laura, can you maybe, I know you've been monitoring the questions coming in. Are there some questions that we can respond to?
Yes, Dave, I'd like to start off with what plans do you have for future research?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. We think, particularly us actuaries who've worked with it, that this was a real positive experience. We wanted to start off with a pretty basic analysis of claim counts in this phase of it. We hope to continue this collaboration in upcoming months to really start to dig into some other questions. One, just to update the data. We have information through 17 accidents. Well, we're a couple years beyond that. Are those trends that we started to see in 16 and 17 of an upswing, is that continuing as those years mature and as we get additional years? Secondly, there's a lot of information we can dig into about severities, medical characteristics, why claims suddenly increase in value or suddenly go down in value, and all kinds of other information related to around the severities. And lastly, around COVID-19, this data all predates COVID-19. Is that going to have some impacts on the mega claim characteristics in the future?
And Crystal, do you think that the share of motor vehicle claims is due to increases in severity rather than increases in relative frequency?
Thanks, Laura. So the motor vehicle claims over time, so the average frequency has not had a visible change. It's just that the severity of motor vehicle claims seems to be more significant than some of the other ones. Just like Laura, I believe it was Laura who mentioned earlier that strain and sprains are a smaller, they are smaller mega claims, and so there are more of those in the $3 million layer. Once we get to the $10 million layer, motor vehicle accidents just happen to be more severe. So it's not that there is an increase in the share over time related to the severity. The over time has been relatively stable. So the relative frequency overall has not changed. It's just the relative in the layers, motor vehicle accidents just happen to be significantly larger.
Then Ryan, a question for you. Are there any other states besides California and New York with sizable changes in mega claims patterns?
We don't know at this time. We only aggregated the data at a bureau level. So NCCI, California, New York, New Jersey, and the other bureaus. So we don't have the information at this time to answer that question, but it is something to consider for the next phase of this research.
And Dave, I've got a question for you around the impact of the limits and severity trends. Could you talk a bit more about how we handled severity trends over time?
Dave, are you still there?
Dave, maybe you.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, a real good question. We want to, each bureau individually took a look at, their process for on-leveling, and for the most part, reflecting inflationary trends over time. In California, we looked at our historical patterns of severity trends. We do, in our analysis, look at different levels of trends by layer of loss, and that was integrated in that. So in essence, the severity assumptions that were used to bring all of these historical losses going back to 2001 to a 2017 level were consistent with what we use in our rate analysis and in our development of loss elimination ratios and excess insurance and charges for our advisory, retro, and large deductible plans. So again, we tried to use our best information available to bring into effect, the severity trends we've historically seen in California that do differ by layer of loss, to bring everything up to a 2018 cost level.
And Ryan, I have one more question for you. Why do we think that the rebound in construction post-recession led to an increase in mega claims emergence?
Well, we know from our data that construction claims are recognized sooner. And we also know that construction accidents are typically more severe than accidents from other sectors. So as you have an increase in construction employment, you can expect an increasing share of accidents to be from the construction industry. And since we know that accidents from the construction industry are more severe, we would then expect more mega claims to result overall.
Thanks, Ryan. And then we've had a number of questions that come in that sort of depend are really about how our data was structured. And in the appendix to the paper, we published some tables of claim counts, and that's really what we based this study on. So we don't have mega claims could be defined on an occurrence level. It depends on how the underlying unit statistical data is configured. We have total numbers. We were unable in the first phase of the study to dig into things, so we don't know, say, how much is contributing medical versus lost time in each state or individual characteristics of the claim. That's really all part of what we'll consider for future research on this topic. And Dave, that was the last question that I'd had. Great.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you for all of you for submitting your questions. So appreciate your attendance, and I know everybody's really busy, so we appreciate you spending almost an hour with us to go over this. And just a reminder, the recordings of this webinar will be on the websites of the various bureaus that participated. You see that there. You do have copies of the reports in your materials. And with that, as we say, our plans are to really kind of continue along. This was a first attempt, a collaborative research among the 10 bureaus you see there. And we thought it was very productive, and we do want to continue it, because in many of these issues, like mega claims, there's value to looking at the data consistently across the country and identifying where trends are similar, where trends are different. So with that, thank you everybody for your attendance, and I hope everybody continues to stay safe and healthy. Have a good day.